One accidental text message shattered my marriage, but what happened next? I never expected to find love in the arms of her best friend, and when she found out, everything unraveled. I've been married to Rachel for 5 years now. She's a corporate attorney, brilliant, composed, and honestly the kind of woman who walks into a room and naturally takes control without saying much. There's a calm, almost intimidating confidence about her that drew me in from the start. We don't have kids yet, it's just been the two of us building a life that I thought was solid, maybe even enviable to others. Nice apartment, decent income, weekend getaways when we could swing it. What more could you ask for? From the outside looking in, everything probably seemed pretty normal. I work in advertising, which keeps my schedule packed, but Rachel's calendar? It's like it never stops. Late nights, weekend meetings, early morning calls, she was always hustling. I used to really admire that about her. That drive was one of the things I loved most when we first got together. But lately, that admiration has turned into something else. Concern maybe. Doubt. At first, it was just little shifts I picked up on, things you'd barely notice unless you're really paying attention. Nights at the office started stretching longer and longer. She'd crash at a hotel because it was closer to the courthouse, or because she needed to prep in silence. It didn't feel like a red flag at the time, just the natural demands of her career. But it wasn't just her schedule. It was us. We used to do date nights every Saturday, try new restaurants, take long drives just to talk. That just stopped. And getting her to make time for something as simple as dinner together felt like trying to book a meeting with a CEO. I told myself we were both just overworked, that the tension was just the cost of 2 careers running full speed. But deep down, something wasn't adding up. This wasn't just drifting apart because life got busy. There was a disconnect, a heaviness in the air that I couldn't shake. Rachel was physically there, sure, but mentally? Emotionally? It was like I was talking to a ghost of who she used to be. Then came the perfume incident. One night, she came home around 11 p.m., saying she was at a strategy session with her team. As she walked past me, I caught this strong scent, floral, high-end, and definitely not her usual. Rachel never really wore perfume unless we were going somewhere special. When I asked her about it, she waved it off casually, saying a colleague gave her a sample and she just tried it out. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But something about the way she said it, it felt rehearsed, like she already had the answer ready. I didn't think too much about it that night. But over the next few weeks, that little moment started to weigh on me. And once you start noticing, it's hard to stop. Rachel was pulling away. Not in a loud or dramatic way. No fights, no yelling. Just silence. Subtle distance. The kind that creeps in slowly and then suddenly feels massive. She used to message me during the day, funny memes, little notes about something that reminded her of me. Those texts dried up. When I reached out, she'd reply with short, cold messages. I'd ask how her day was and the answer was always the same: busy. We'll talk later. But later never came. One evening we were sitting on the couch, both pretending to watch TV. I couldn't take it anymore, so I finally brought it up. I asked if she was okay, if we were okay. Told her I felt like something was off between us. That maybe we needed to talk about it before things got worse. She turned to me, really looked at me for what felt like the first time in ages, and gave me this smile. But it didn't feel real. It was too polished, too perfect. Like a smile you give in a photo, not one you give someone you love. She told me I was overanalyzing everything. That work had been insane lately and she was just drained. She even laughed and made a joke about me becoming paranoid. But I couldn't ignore the signs anymore. The way she kept glancing at her phone, like she was waiting for a message she didn't want me to see. The moments when she completely zoned out even when I was speaking directly to her. And every time I tried to bring up us, she'd dodge the topic or steer the conversation somewhere else. I don't know what's happening. Maybe I'm connecting dots that don't belong together. Or maybe I already know the truth and just don't want to admit it. Has anyone else been through something like this? Am I crazy for feeling this way, or does this sound familiar to anyone? I could really use some perspective. What really started gnawing at me, though, was when Rachel began mentioning this new guy at her firm, some consultant named Alex. At first, he was just a passing reference in her stories about work. Nothing that raised alarms. Alex helped us out with the financials, or Alex had this great idea for trial strategy. Just casual stuff. But then his name kept coming up. A little too often. She'd drop him into conversations that had nothing to do with work. Alex says this restaurant downtown is amazing, or Alex just got back from this trip to Italy, he brought back the best coffee. Every time she said his name, there was this barely noticeable shift in her tone. A lightness. And a faint smile would sneak across her lips. The kind that you don't even realize you're making when you're thinking about someone you enjoy being around. At first, I chalked it up to my imagination. Maybe I was reading into things too much. Maybe I was letting my insecurities get the better of me. But that instinct, that little voice in my gut, was starting to get louder. And the more I tried to ignore it, the more it clawed at me. You know that sick feeling you get in your stomach when you know something isn't right, even if you don't have the evidence yet? That's where I was. I felt like I was slowly becoming an outsider in my own life, like I was watching Rachel drift toward something, or someone, and I couldn't stop it. Still, I told myself not to jump to conclusions. I needed something concrete, something real before I said anything. I didn't want to be the guy who let suspicion ruin everything if there was nothing to it. I kept quiet, kept watching, hoping it was all just a phase. Maybe the stress of our jobs was taking a toll. Maybe this distance was just temporary. But then something happened that I never expected. It was a regular Tuesday night and I'd left the office early. Rachel had messaged earlier saying she'd be working late again. So there I was, lounging on the couch, flipping through TV channels without really watching anything when my phone lit up. It was a number I didn't recognize. Normally I'd let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. "Hello," I said cautiously. The voice on the other end was quiet, hesitant. Hi. Is this Mark?" My heart skipped. "Yeah, this is Mark. Who's this?" There was a pause, long enough for me to hear her breathing, shaky and unsure. "My name's Nicole. I don't know how to say this, but I think you deserve to know something." I sat up, my pulse already pounding. "Know what?" "It's about your wife, Rachel." The way she said Rachel's name, it hit like a punch to the chest. She wasn't just some stranger randomly calling me. She knew something. "What about her?" I asked, the words barely coming out. Nicole took a breath, like she was gathering the courage to break something that couldn't be unbroken. "I work at a high-end menswear boutique downtown. Rachel's been coming in there a lot recently. She's been seeing someone." "What do you mean, seeing someone?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I think she's having an affair with one of the consultants here," she said, the words slow, almost reluctant. "His name's Alex. They've been meeting here, spending a lot of time together outside of regular shopping appointments. And it's not just business. You can tell when people are involved." I was frozen. Like my mind refused to catch up with the words she was saying. "Rachel? With Alex? In a clothing store?" "I don't understand," I muttered. "Why are you telling me this?" Nicole sighed. "Because if I were in your shoes, I'd want to know. I kept seeing them week after week and I couldn't keep quiet about it anymore. I know it's not my place, but it just didn't feel right." I didn't know what to say. My whole world started spinning, and I was gripping the phone like it was the only thing keeping me upright. "I'm sorry," she added quietly. "I just thought you should know." And then the call ended. I sat there, phone still in my hand, staring blankly at the television, which had been playing the same show for half an hour, not that I remembered a second of it. My heart felt like it had dropped straight into my stomach. I couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't breathe. Was this really happening? Was Rachel really? Part of me wanted to drive to her office, burst in and demand answers. But the other part, the bigger part, was numb. Numb with the realization that a total stranger had just cracked my marriage open with a few sentences. And now I was sitting in the ruins not knowing what to do next. That call changed everything. I just didn't know what I was supposed to do with that truth. I wanted so badly to believe it wasn't true. That maybe Nicole had misunderstood something, or worse, had some kind of personal motive. Maybe she was just stirring up trouble. But there was something about the way she spoke, soft, hesitant, like she didn't want to hurt me, only help. And that's what hit the hardest. She didn't sound like someone trying to sabotage my marriage. She sounded honest. And that honesty terrified me. After the call, I couldn't stop the doubts from creeping in. I kept thinking back over the last few months, replaying every little moment that had felt off but that I'd brushed aside at the time. The late nights at the office. The overnight strategy meetings. The perfume that wasn't hers. And, of course, Alex. That name kept echoing in my head. Alex. It felt impossible to believe it was all just coincidence, that he just happened to be the name she brought up constantly, the one she lit up about in conversation. I tried to convince myself I was being ridiculous, that I was letting my imagination run wild, but the harder I tried to ignore it, the louder the alarm bells rang in my head. Maybe I hadn't wanted to see it. Maybe I'd blinded myself to the signs because facing the truth, that Rachel, my Rachel, might be involved with someone else, was just too painful. But now, after that phone call, I couldn't avoid it anymore. I had to face it even if I wasn't ready. I started pacing, unable to sit still. That sinking feeling of betrayal settled in my stomach like a rock. My brain kept yelling at me to stay calm, to think logically. Maybe Nicole had gotten it wrong. Maybe what she saw wasn't what it looked like. But my gut said otherwise. And deep down, I knew. Still, I couldn't confront Rachel without something more concrete. A phone call from a stranger wasn't enough to go to war over. Not yet. I needed clarity. I needed something real. So I told myself I'd wait. Keep my eyes open. Act normal. Try not to let on that everything inside me was coming apart. That evening, Rachel came home just like always. She looked tired, like she'd had a long day, and gave me a quick kiss on the cheek as she walked past me. I flinched, not enough for her to notice, I hoped, but I couldn't help wondering where she'd been, who she'd been with, if she'd just come from seeing him. "How was your day?" she asked, her tone light and routine. "Busy," I replied, trying to sound casual, though I could barely breathe. "How about yours?" She sighed. "Exhausting. I'm going to have to stay late tomorrow too, Alex, and I need to go over some deposition material." There was again his name. And it landed like a punch to the chest. I clenched my jaw but stayed quiet. She didn't seem to notice the shift in me. Or maybe she did and she was just too good at hiding it. I nodded slowly, pretending to pay attention to the TV while she disappeared into the bedroom. My eyes were fixed on the screen, but my mind was a million miles away. I could feel something inside me breaking, something I couldn't put back together. What made it worse, what made it unbearable, was that I still loved her. Despite everything. Even with the doubts and the creeping sense of betrayal, I loved her. And the idea of losing her, of facing a future without her, felt like it would tear me apart. But I knew I couldn't keep living in this fog forever. Sooner or later, the truth was going to come out. And I had to be ready for it. The next morning, I woke up with that same hollow feeling in my chest. The weight of Nicole's words still pressed down on me, heavy and unrelenting. Rachel was already up, moving through her morning like nothing had changed. By the time I got out of bed, she was in the kitchen, dressed immaculately like always, sipping her coffee and reading something on her phone. I stood in the doorway watching her, wondering if I was missing something, some crack in her expression, some flicker of guilt. But there was nothing. Just the same polished, composed woman I married. She smiled when she noticed me and walked over to give me a quick kiss. "I've got another late night," she said, brushing past me. "Alex and I need to go over notes again." Her words sliced through me, but I managed to nod. "Right. Sure." She smiled again, perfect, practiced, and then she was gone. Out the door just like that. Like any other day. I stayed in the kitchen long after she'd left, staring at the empty space where she'd stood. My hands were shaking slightly, and my thoughts were racing in every direction. I felt like I was losing my grip on everything I thought I knew. And I couldn't help wondering how much longer I could keep pretending this wasn't happening. Then something unexpected happened. Something I couldn't have prepared for, no matter how many sleepless nights I'd spent thinking about what might come next. It was the middle of the morning and I was sitting at my desk, barely pretending to work. My head was a mess. I kept replaying Nicole's call over and over, trying to find some way to poke holes in her story, but everything just kept pointing in the same direction. That's when my phone buzzed. I glanced down, expecting a client email or maybe something from my boss. But it wasn't work. It was a message from Rachel. The text was short, almost too normal. "Running late. Let's grab lunch tomorrow. I love you. Hugs and kisses." I stared at it for a moment, puzzled. We hadn't talked about lunch plans and Rachel never sent texts like that during the workday. But before I could even respond, another message popped up. "Can't wait to see you tonight, baby. Same hotel." And just like that, my whole body went cold. I sat frozen in my chair, my stomach turning in knots. That message, it wasn't meant for me. I knew it the second I read it. My heart started pounding as a heavy silence fell around me, even though the office was buzzing with noise. I tried to make sense of it. Maybe it was a weird typo. Maybe some kind of autocorrect gone wrong. A joke even? But deep down I already knew the truth. This was the slip. The mistake that confirmed everything I hadn't wanted to believe. With hands trembling, I typed back, "Who was that last message for?" Minutes passed. Long, dragging minutes that felt like an eternity. My heart was thudding against my ribs as I stared at my phone, waiting. When her response finally came in, I already knew what she was going to say. "Oh, that was meant for Alex. We're meeting a client at the hotel conference center later today. Sorry, babe. Ignore that. Love you." It was so casual. So clean. Too clean. Like she had a backup excuse already prepared just in case. I sat there in stunned silence, staring at the screen. Rachel was intelligent. She didn't slip easily. She knew how to craft words to sound harmless. But this felt too rehearsed. And after everything I'd already seen, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a clumsy mistake. It felt like I was watching her cover her tracks. I didn't respond. I couldn't. The rest of the day passed in a blur, with that message burned into the back of my mind. I went through the motions at work, nodding through meetings and emails, but I wasn't there. My head was somewhere else entirely. That night, Rachel came home late, just like she said she would. She looked relaxed, even cheerful. Walked through the door, gave me a soft kiss on the forehead, then headed into the bedroom to change like it was just another evening. I sat on the couch, phone still in my hand, staring down at that text like it might suddenly rewrite itself. I wanted to confront her right then. I wanted to demand the truth and watch her try to spin another explanation. But I didn't. Not yet. Because I needed more than suspicion. More than a misfired message and a stranger's warning. I needed something undeniable. And the hardest part? I still loved her. I loved her even when the doubt was choking me. Even as my trust in her cracked and split. Losing her still felt like it would destroy me. But I knew I couldn't stay in the dark much longer. That night, after she fell asleep beside me, I stared up at the ceiling, wide awake. My mind was racing, looping through every sign, every detail. The perfume. The silence. The way she smiled when she said his name. The phone call. The text. Each one its own piece of a puzzle I didn't want to finish. But the picture was already coming together. The next morning I made up my mind. I called in sick and stayed home. I couldn't sit around wondering anymore. I needed answers. Real ones. Rachel left just after sunrise, all dressed up and coffee in hand, saying she had another jam-packed day of meetings. She gave me a quick kiss, said she'd probably be back late again, and walked out the door like nothing was wrong. As soon as she was gone, I grabbed my keys and followed. I drove downtown, parking a few blocks away from her office. My palms were sweating, my heart beat a steady drum in my chest. I felt ridiculous, sitting in my car like some amateur detective, but what choice did I have? I needed to see it for myself. After what felt like an eternity, I saw her. Rachel stepped out of the building, phone in one hand, laughing at something. And beside her was a man. I didn't need an introduction to know who he was. It was Alex. Tall, clean-cut, sharply dressed. The type of guy who looked like he belonged on the cover of a business magazine. Confident. Charismatic. The kind of man who walked like the world always said yes to him. They were standing close. Too close. And the way she looked at him, warm, relaxed, familiar, it was a look I hadn't seen from her in months. That's when I knew. Everything I'd been afraid of, it was happening right in front of me. I watched from a distance as Rachel and Alex strolled side by side down the street, their heads tilted toward each other, talking closely, almost intimately. It wasn't the kind of casual conversation you'd expect from two coworkers on a break. It was more personal than that. There was a comfort in the way they moved, a rhythm like they'd done this before. She laughed at something he said, that soft, familiar laugh I hadn't heard from her in what felt like forever. And the sound of it, hearing her laugh like that with someone else, hit me harder than I expected. My chest tightened as I realized how far from me she really was. I kept my distance, trailing them from the other side of the street. I wasn't proud of what I was doing, but I couldn't stop myself. I needed to see it. I needed something real to justify the pit that had been living in my stomach for weeks. They turned down a quiet side street and slipped into a little cafe tucked between buildings. One of those cozy, out-of-the-way spots Rachel and I used to visit back when we made time for things like brunch and afternoon coffee dates. Seeing her there with him, sitting across from him like it was just another day, crushed me. They didn't look like colleagues discussing a case. They looked like something else entirely. Something more familiar. More dangerous. I stayed parked across the street, hidden just behind the tinted windows, watching through the glass as they talked, leaned in, shared soft smiles and lingering glances. She looked relaxed with him. At ease. It was like watching a version of her I hadn't seen in months. After an hour or so they stood up and walked out together. I stayed put watching. They didn't head back toward her office. Instead, they turned in the direction of a nearby hotel. My heart started racing. I already knew what was happening, but seeing them walk through those doors together, disappear into that building without hesitation, was like watching a door slam shut on everything I thought I knew. I sat there in silence, frozen, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My body was trembling, and my mind couldn't keep up with the flood of emotions crashing through me. It wasn't a hunch anymore. It wasn't a gut feeling or some twisted fear I couldn't name. It was real. Rachel was cheating. And suddenly all the pieces, the changes, the lies, the distance, clicked into place with painful clarity. But still I didn't confront her. Not yet. Not without something she couldn't spin or explain away with carefully chosen words. I needed undeniable evidence. That night she came home late again. She looked light, like a weight had been lifted. She greeted me with a smile, asked about my day like she hadn't just spent the afternoon wrapped up in someone else's life. She even suggested dinner out over the weekend like she was trying to rewind time, press reset on us, maybe even ease her own guilt. I smiled. I played the part. But behind the smile I was already building a plan. The next few days were a blur of quiet preparation. I installed a GPS tracker on her phone, not something I ever thought I'd do, but at this point, it didn't feel like I had another option. I knew her login info, she'd never changed it. It was shockingly easy. I also placed a small camera in the hallway closet, angled just enough to catch the living room and entryway. It wasn't about being sneaky, it was about survival. About truth. I hated that it had come to this. But I hated the lies more. Every day that passed, I walked through our home with a mask on. I smiled when I needed to, laughed when it was expected, kissed her goodnight even when every fiber of me recoiled from the thought of who else she might be kissing. The waiting was unbearable. But I told myself it would be worth it if it brought the truth into the light. Then one evening something shifted. She came home earlier than usual and for a second my stomach dropped. Had she figured it out? Was she onto me? But her face didn't show suspicion, just the same tired, worn expression she'd been carrying for weeks, like she was the one holding secrets too heavy to keep. "Hey," she said as she stepped inside, shaking off the rain and hanging her coat. "I was thinking, maybe we could cook dinner tonight? Just the two of us. It's been forever since we had a quiet night together." I blinked. After all the distance, the lies, the disappearances, now she wanted normal? A date night? Was it guilt? A cover? Or was she testing me? Still, I forced a smile, nodded slowly. "Yeah, sure. That sounds good." It came out hollow, but she didn't seem to notice. Maybe she thought I was still in the dark. Maybe she believed her mask was still working. But I wasn't in the dark anymore. I was just waiting for the light to expose everything. We ended up at one of those places that used to mean something to us. A little Italian spot tucked away on a quiet corner of the city. Back in the early days we used to go there all the time. It was our place. A comfort. A memory wrapped in candlelight and pasta. But that night, it felt like we were ghosts just moving through a script we'd both forgotten how to believe in. Rachel talked like everything was fine. She asked about my work, cracked a few old inside jokes, even reached across the table to touch my hand like she used to. But every word, every gesture felt off, like she was reciting lines from a version of our life that didn't exist anymore. And every time her fingers brushed against mine, I winced, imagining those same hands on someone else. I couldn't even taste the food. It sat on my plate like decoration, untouched. The wine didn't do much to help either. It just swirled around in the glass while my thoughts screamed over the sound of her laughter. Later, when we got home, Rachel seemed unusually lighthearted, like she truly believed our night out had fixed something between us. In the kitchen, she leaned in for a kiss, and for the first time in our marriage, I turned away. Just slightly. But enough. She paused, her eyes narrowing just a bit. "What's wrong?" she asked softly. I forced a tight smile and shook my head. "Nothing. Just a long day. I'm beat." She looked at me for a moment longer, like she was trying to decide whether to push. But then she just smiled, thin, distant, and walked off toward the bedroom. I stood there for a few minutes, hands buried in my pockets, wondering how much longer I could keep living in this performance. We were both lying, both playing a part. But I couldn't stop now. I was too close to the truth. Later that night, after Rachel fell asleep, I checked the tracking app on my phone. And there it was. The hotel again. Same place. Same time as before. She hadn't even tried to hide it. But nothing prepared me for what I saw the next day. Rachel had told me she'd be working late again, so I came home expecting the usual, an empty house and more quiet time to think. I was sitting on the couch, running through everything in my head when a notification popped up on my phone. It was from the camera in our bedroom. I opened the feed and froze. There she was, Rachel, standing by our bed, suitcase open, folding her clothes with a calm I couldn't understand. Not hurried, not panicked, just certain. I watched as she packed with precision, slipping in dresses, tops, shoes, like she'd done this before. Like she'd been preparing for this moment quietly, methodically, while I was sitting in the next room pretending not to notice the cracks in our world. My throat tightened. My hands started to shake. She wasn't just cheating. She was leaving. When she finished, she zipped up the suitcase and left the room. The feed cut out. And I sat there, stunned, staring at the screen. It wasn't even the betrayal that hurt most right then. It was the quiet, decisive way she was ready to walk away without even telling me. I knew the confrontation was coming. I could feel it building like a thunderstorm. I just didn't know when it would hit. The next day, I woke up knowing I couldn't keep playing along. Rachel had crossed a line, and now it was just a matter of when she'd admit it. That evening, when I came home from work, she was already there, sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop, papers spread out like always. Same routine. Same illusion. "Hey," she said, not even looking up. "Dinner plans tonight? I've got to leave for a quick business trip tomorrow, but I'll be back by the weekend." There it was. The excuse. I felt the blood rush in my ears, but I stayed calm. "Business trip?" I asked, keeping my voice even. "Yeah," she said smoothly. "It's a big case. They need me to meet with a client out of town." I nodded slowly, studying her face. "Where exactly are you headed?" She hesitated for the briefest second, just a blink, but I caught it. The first crack in the mask. She paused for a second, barely noticeable, but I caught it. That tiny flicker of hesitation before she responded. "It's just a short thing downtown. Shouldn't take more than a couple of days. I'll be back by the weekend." The lie hung between us like smoke, thin but impossible to ignore. I didn't call her on it. Not yet. I just studied her, noting how smoothly the words left her lips, how not even a twitch of guilt crossed her face. She didn't stumble. Didn't blink. It was too easy for her. "All right," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Safe travels." She smiled, visibly relieved. "Thanks. I'll text you when I check in." That night, she packed more than usual. A few suits, blouses, and heels she only wore when she was trying to impress. Not the kind of stuff you bring for a couple of client meetings. I leaned in the doorway of the bedroom as she zipped up her suitcase. I asked if she wanted help, and she brushed me off with a soft smile. "I've got it," she said, like this was just another business trip. But I knew better. The next morning, Rachel kissed me goodbye at the door, told me she'd call when she landed, and drove off like she always did, cool, composed, and in control. I watched her taillights disappear and stood there for a long moment, heart pounding, breath caught in my throat. I knew she wasn't going to the airport. As soon as she was out of sight, I opened the tracking app. And there it was, her location lit up on the screen. She was headed straight to the hotel. Not a terminal. Not a client's office. Just the same hotel she'd been to before. I couldn't sit back anymore. I needed to see it with my own eyes. I got in my car, heart in my throat, and drove across town. Every mile felt heavier than the last. I didn't even know what I was going to say or do when I got there. All I knew was I couldn't keep living in this limbo, in this sick game of denial and half-truths. When I reached the hotel, I parked a few blocks away and walked the rest of the way. My legs felt like concrete. My mind was a blur. The lobby was quiet, calm, indifferent to the storm inside me. I stepped up to the front desk, trying to keep my voice even. "I'm here to meet my wife, Rachel Monroe. I think she's already checked in?" The clerk typed for a moment, then nodded. "Room 509. I don't know how I made it to the 5th floor. The elevator felt like it crawled. Each ding of passing floors felt like a drumbeat leading to something I couldn't unsee. When I reached the hallway, I stood outside the door for what felt like forever. My hand hovered near the keycard. I took one last breath and slid it through. Click. The door opened slowly. At first, the room looked empty. Still quiet. But then I saw them. Clothes strewn across the floor. A trail leading from the door to the bed. And there, tangled in the sheets, was Rachel. And she wasn't alone. Lying beside her, chest bare, was Alex. She was curled against him, one hand resting across his stomach, eyes closed like she hadn't a care in the world. Time froze. Everything I had feared, everything I had suspected, was suddenly painfully real. They didn't even notice me standing there. I found my voice, though it came out like a whisper wrapped in steel. "Rachel." She shot up, eyes wide. The color drained from her face as soon as she saw me. "Mark, this isn't." "Don't," I cut her off, my voice calm but tight with hurt. "Just don't." Alex sat up awkwardly, fumbling for his shirt, muttering something I didn't care to hear. All I could focus on was her, this woman I thought I knew, this woman who had just torn our life in half. "I saw the tracker," I said, stepping back. "I saw the camera. And now I've seen this." Her lips parted, but no words came out. "There's nothing left to explain," I said. "It's done." I turned around and walked out before she could speak another lie. The elevator ride down was silent. The lobby unchanged. Outside, the air felt different. Cold but honest. Walking away hurt. It burned through every nerve in my body. But there was something else beneath the pain, a kind of clarity. I wasn't in the dark anymore. And for the first time in a long time I felt free. After that night at the hotel, something in me snapped. I walked out of that room and left the pieces of our 5-year marriage scattered behind me. Rachel tried reaching out, texts, missed calls, voicemails filled with shaky apologies, but I didn't answer any of them. I couldn't. Just the thought of hearing her voice made my stomach turn. I'd had enough of lies. A few days passed and right on cue she showed up at the house. I almost didn't recognize her at first, hair undone, eyes red, her usual polished appearance nowhere in sight. She stood on the porch, pleading for a few minutes to explain herself. But at that point I wasn't interested in hearing the why anymore. The damage was done. I had nothing left to give. And then there was Julia, Rachel's best friend. Julia and I had always gotten along casually. She was sharp, honest, and not one to sugarcoat things. Maybe that's why she and Rachel clicked so well. But after the affair came to light, I guess I found myself gravitating toward people who understood what betrayal looked like from the inside. Julia had heard everything. Rachel had confided in her, probably hoping for backup or a sympathetic ear. But Julia wasn't the type to defend someone just because they were friends, especially not when she knew they were dead wrong. One evening she called me. Said she was checking in and if I needed to talk she was around. I figured what the hell. I had nothing to lose at that point. We met up at a quiet bar across town. At first it was just two people catching up, sharing drinks and trying to make sense of the chaos. I vented. She listened. And the way she looked at me that night, it wasn't with pity. It was with understanding. Her words weren't empty. She didn't try to excuse Rachel's actions. She just sat there, present, real. One drink turned into two. Two turned into three. Before I knew it, we were back at my place. What happened that night wasn't planned. It wasn't some calculated move to get back at Rachel. Honestly, it started as two hurt people reaching for something, anything, that made them feel human again. I thought it would be a one-time thing. A distraction. But the strange thing was it didn't feel empty. The days that followed were unexpected. Julia and I kept seeing each other. Not just in secret, not just for comfort. It started to feel like something real. Something solid. She wasn't just Rachel's friend anymore. She was someone I looked forward to seeing. Someone who made me feel seen. Then 2 weeks after the hotel incident, it happened. Rachel showed up at the house again, unannounced of course, just as Julia was walking out the front door. I'll never forget the moment her eyes landed on us. The way her footsteps froze on the sidewalk. Her mouth opened like she wanted to speak, but no words came out. She looked from me to Julia and back again, the reality of what she was seeing finally sinking in. Mark. Julia? Her voice cracked as she said it. I didn't move. Julia didn't either. We just stood there, letting the silence say what we didn't need to. Rachel's face shifted from confusion to horror. Her hands began to shake. No, this isn't real, she whispered like she was trying to convince herself more than us. Then, without warning, she dropped to her knees right there on the walkway. Tears poured down her cheeks and her voice trembled. Please, Mark, she sobbed. Please don't do this. I messed up. I know I did. But I can fix it. I swear. Just don't shut me out. Please. She crawled forward, reaching for me, grabbing the hem of my jeans like she was trying to hold on to something that was already gone. I'll go to therapy. We can go together. I'll do whatever it takes. Just, please don't leave me. For a moment I felt something, maybe pity, maybe a flash of the old US. But then the images came rushing back. Her in bed with him, the texts, the lies, the way she planned to leave without even telling me. And just like that, the pity disappeared. You should have thought about that before, I said, stepping back. Before you lied. Before you chose him. You didn't care then. Why should I now? She sobbed harder, her hands trembling as they reached for me again. Mark, please. Don't do this. That's when Julia stepped forward, calm and composed. She didn't say a word at first. Just stood beside me, her presence like a wall Rachel couldn't climb. Rachel looked up at her, stunned. Her voice broke as she whispered, How could you, Julia? You were my best friend. Julia folded her arms. Until I realized you didn't respect what you had. You didn't just betray Mark, you betrayed me too. Rachel crumbled. Right there on the sidewalk. Her sobs echoing through the quiet neighborhood, her hands grasping at a reality that didn't exist anymore. She'd lost everything. And for the first time in weeks I felt like I could finally breathe. It wasn't about revenge anymore. Not really. What started between Julia and me as something born out of pain, confusion, and emotional survival had quietly grown into something honest. Something meaningful. I didn't see it coming, but when it did, I knew I didn't want to let it go. I crouched down that evening, met Rachel's tear-streaked face with calm eyes, and said the words I'd been carrying inside me for days. "Rachel, it's over. You need to leave." Her hands were trembling, eyes red and puffy. "Please, Mark. Please don't do this," she whispered, her voice breaking like the life she once imagined we'd share. But I didn't flinch. "You made your decision. Now you have to live with it." Then I turned and walked inside. Julia followed close behind, quiet and steady. We left Rachel there on her knees, sobbing in the doorway like a woman who had finally realized the cost of everything she'd thrown away. And when that door closed behind us, something settled inside me, a quiet sense of finality. Closure. Rachel was my past. But Julia was becoming something much more. In the weeks that followed, my world began to shift. What I thought was just a temporary connection with Julia turned into late-night talks, laughter over takeout, moments of peace that I hadn't felt in years. She saw me for who I was, flawed, wounded, but real, and she didn't try to fix me. She just stayed. Eventually she moved in. And what felt like rubble from a broken life slowly turned into a foundation for something new. We weren't perfect and we never pretended to be. But we were honest. And that honesty made all the difference. Then, one quiet evening over dinner, she reached across the table, her eyes soft, and said, "Mark, I'm pregnant." For a moment I just sat there, stunned. Not afraid, just overwhelmed by a rush of emotions I hadn't felt in years. This wasn't panic. This wasn't fear. This was joy. "You're serious?" I asked, my voice cracking a little. She nodded, eyes glassy. "You're going to be a dad." I pulled her into me, held her close, and let that truth wash over me. A child. A family. A future. It wasn't something I ever imagined after everything I'd lost. But there it was, real and steady, right in front of me. Meanwhile, Rachel's life unraveled. Word of her affair spread quickly at her firm, and it wasn't the first time she'd crossed professional lines. The other incidents had been swept quietly under the rug, but this time the fallout couldn't be contained. She was let go within weeks. Her once impeccable reputation fell apart, and so did her carefully curated image. As for Alex, he disappeared just as fast. When the scandal caught up with them, he ghosted. No calls, no texts, just gone. He wasn't looking for love. He was just looking for the thrill, and once the dust settled, Rachel had nothing left but silence. She came back around, of course. More than once. She stood on my porch, tears in her eyes, voice shaking. "I've lost everything, Mark. I know I hurt you, but please, give me another chance. We can rebuild. We can fix this." But I had nothing left to give her. Julia stood beside me, quiet but firm. She never needed to say anything. Just being there was enough. Rachel would try again and again to rewrite the past, to turn back time. But she never could. The final time she showed up was after word got out about the baby. I hadn't planned on telling anyone beyond close friends, but somehow Rachel heard. She stormed up the walkway, fire in her eyes, fury radiating off her in waves. "You're having a baby?" she hissed. "With her?" Julia stayed by my side, calm and unmoved. I stood between them. "Yes," I said, steady. "We are." Her hands clenched into fists. "You replaced me. Just like that." "No," I replied. "You replaced yourself when you chose someone else." She screamed, tears running down her face. "I made one mistake, Mark. One. We could have had a family. But it wasn't one mistake. It was a series of choices. And every one of them had driven a nail into the coffin of what we used to be." "You need to go," I told her, stepping closer. "This isn't your life anymore." Her face crumpled and she took a shaky breath. "You don't understand. I have nothing left. You were all I had." "No," I said. "I was what you threw away. And now I've moved on. You should too." She looked at Julia, then back at me, eyes hollow. "How could you do this to me?" But it wasn't about her anymore. Without another word, she turned and walked away, slowly, like someone who finally understood they'd burned the very bridge they were now trying to cross. The door clicked shut behind us. And with it, so did that chapter of my life. Now, as I sit here beside Julia, her hand in mine, and our child on the way, I see things clearer than ever before. I didn't just survive Rachel's betrayal, I grew from it. I found something better. Someone real. A love built not from desperation but from mutual respect and truth. Rachel will always be a part of my story. But Julia and our child? They're my future. And for the first time in years I feel whole again.